Hey guys, tonight we're taking a long, quiet walk into a place where time doesn't rush, voices don't rise, and even your heartbeat seems to bow respectfully at the door. We're stepping into the day-to-day life of a 17th century Japanese tea master, a person who wakes before the steam rises and doesn't stop thinking about water temperature until long after the moon shows up. Spoiler alert, this routine is not for adrenaline junkies. You probably won't survive this if you require instant gratification or, say, central heating. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling extra cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The room is dim. Not dark. Just resting. Paper screens cast soft shadows as morning light begins to think about showing up. You're already awake. In fact, you've been awake since before the roosters remembered their job. Not that you're annoyed. You don't really get annoyed anymore. You're a tea master, after all. Annoyance is for people with spare time. You sit up slowly on your tatami mat, knees creaking like old stairs. There's no alarm clock. Just the hush of the house and the thin hiss of the wind squeezing between cedar boards. Your bones protest, but politely. You bow, first to the floor, then to the rising sun, even though it's technically still off stage, and begin the first movement of a long, intentional day. Your first duty? Find the kettle before it finds you. You pad across the floor in socked feet, a soft shuffle that wouldn't wake a dreaming cat. You pass the small alcove with the calligraphy scroll. Today's poem reads something about the moment between droplets, which sounds profound but mostly reminds you you're thirsty. Your destination is the kitchen hearth, an irori set into the floor, where a round iron kettle rests like a sleepy sentry. It isn't boiling yet, but it's thinking about it. You squat beside it and run your hand above the lid. It's warm. Not quite alive. You gently adjust the coals, stir the ash with a bamboo stick, and let the heat rise. This is not the part where you make tea. This is the part where you wait. Historians still argue whether tea masters actually enjoyed this silence, or whether they just got really good at pretending boredom was spiritual. But either way, you do enjoy it. It's like meditation, but with purpose. A purpose that involves steam. You close your eyes and listen. Not just for the kettle, but for everything. The creak of the rafters. A crow cawing from the bamboo grove. The slow, sure breath of a house that's been steeped in stillness for decades. Maybe centuries. Outside, it's still mostly dark. A soft, pale dark. Not the kind that scares you. The kind that wraps itself around your shoulders and says, not yet, but soon. You stretch, slow and deliberate, and think about the day ahead. There will be sweeping, polishing, measuring, rehearsing. There may be guests, or not. There will definitely be whisking, and bowing, and burning your thumb on a hot ladle despite decades of experience. But that's all later. Right now, there's only the kettle. You listen closely. You know its moods. You can tell when it's just exhaling a little, and when it's truly ready to sing. Right now, it's murmuring, a sound the old tea masters called matsukes, or wind in the pines. They said the perfect boil should sound like that. Not angry. Not hissing. Just rustling softly in a dream. You add another piece of charcoal and settle back, letting your spine realign with the floorboards. The scent of smoke curls around you, clean smoke, dry wood, no urgency. You breathe it in. The first scent of the day. That, and the faint trace of camellia oil from yesterday's cloth, folded carefully and tucked beneath the shelf. Time passes, though you don't feel it. One interesting fact, during this era, time was not counted in hours but in temporal hours, seasonally shifting blocks of time marked by the rising and setting of the sun. In summer, the hour of the ox could last longer than a modern hour. In winter, it shrank. And you, the tea master, moved not by numbers, but by cues, warmth of kettle, angle of light, the moment a sparrow lands on the windowsill. You hum softly, a melody no one else would recognize, because it's just for you and the iron pot. One note for the water. One for the heat. One for yourself. And then, finally, the kettle changes tone. A single puff of steam whispers out from beneath the lid. You smile. Not because something is done, but because something is beginning. You stand, slowly, knees murmuring their usual complaints, and walk back through the house with that careful gait tea masters are known for. The kind that says, I have nothing urgent to do, but everything I do is important. Before you can attend to tea or guests or even brushing your own teeth, spoiler, they use twigs or saltwater rinses, there's the next most sacred morning ritual, sweeping. Not just inside. Oh no! That would be far too easy. The outside needs sweeping too. You step out through the sliding door, onto the wooden inglewa that wraps around the house like a porch made of poetry. The sky is now a gentle gray blue, and the dew is soaking into every leaf, stone, and sandal. Somewhere in the distance, a pheasant announces itself as if it just invented sunrise. In your hand, a broom made of tied twigs. Not a broom with twigs. A broom of twigs. There's a difference. You begin with the inner courtyard. The gravel is carefully arranged, white, raked yesterday into a pattern that's meant to resemble flowing water. Today, some bird tracks and a few wandering leaves have introduced a little chaos. Nothing dramatic. Just nature nudging you and saying, "Good morning, I mess with your art." You sweep. Not to undo nature, but to start again. That's the key here. Zen sweeping isn't about cleaning. It's about intention. It's a full-body meditation disguised as housework. Your back bends with care. Your arms follow a rhythm. Sweep, step, breathe. Sweep, step, breathe. Mainstream fact, tea masters weren't just drink preparers. They were curators of entire experiences, architects of atmosphere. The way the garden looked was part of the tea. The crunch underfoot, the sound of bristles on stone, the wet scent of moss warming in the sun, all of it brewed the moment long before any water hit powder. Fringe tidbit? Some tea masters were so particular about gravel alignment that they trained apprentices for years just in raking. One master reportedly exiled a student for arranging pebbles in a shape he described as too loud. To this day, historians still argue whether he meant visually loud or if he was literally claiming the rocks were yelling. You move on to the stepping stones that lead toward the outer gate. They're slick with dew, bordered by tufts of grass and the odd stubborn weed. You sweep them with special reverence, because this is the path your guests will walk. Even if you don't host anyone today, the stones must be ready. The idea is simple and wildly unreasonable, perfection for its own sake. Not because someone will see it, but because you will. Back inside, the wooden floorboards creak as you enter the tea room again. The hearth glows softly, still breathing. You bow to it, not performatively, not for show, but as a small nod of acknowledgement to the element that sustains so much of your work. The inner sweeping comes next. Tatami mats don't like to be manhandled. You sweep them gently with a soft brush, taking care to follow the grain. Not across. never across. It's slow work. Which is, of course, the point. You could easily finish it in 5 minutes if you rushed. But this is not the kind of life where rushing earns you anything. Instead, you treat each stroke like a prayer. Each section like a pause between thoughts. The brush lifts dust so fine you barely see it, and yet you know it's there. Bits of yesterday, bits of smoke, maybe a single eyelash from a guest who drank tea here a week ago. You sweep those away too. Not to erase them. Just to make room for what's next. And then, the final part of your morning route, the outer edge. You slip into your outdoor slippers, wooden geta, elevated like tiny platforms for introverts, and step out into the front path. The wind has picked up a little. You tighten your robe, which for the record is not a kimono in the modern sense. It's a work robe, called a samu, and no, it's not especially warm. But it makes you feel like you belong to something older than the weather. The outer path is lined with flagstones, some of which are cracked but familiar. You sweep these too. Carefully. Deliberately. Even though no one is watching. Especially because no one is watching. You remember a line your teacher once told you. Sweep until the stones remember they are beautiful. You didn't get it at the time. Now, you do. By the time you're finished, your arms are pleasantly sore, your breath is even, and the world feels slightly more in order. Not fixed. Not tamed. Just aligned. You return to the tea room, stepping through the sliding door with the same care you used when you swept the entrance. The broom is set aside. Not tossed. Not leaned. Placed, with the same intention you'll use later when setting down a tea bowl. Because everything matters. Not because it has to, but because it can. The kettle has been murmuring this whole time. Not impatiently, kettles don't do impatience. Just steadily, like a person humming to themselves while waiting for someone else to figure things out. You return to it now, bending low again, folding your knees like they're made of silk, not cartilage. A thin plume of steam rises as you lift the lid. Not bubbling, not boiling, just a soft exhale. Perfect. You let it breathe for a few seconds more before placing the lid back on, listening to how the sound changes with even the slightest shift in pressure. You reach for the hishaku, the long-handled bamboo ladle that feels more like a wand than a tool, and begin the first pour of the day. This isn't for a guest. It's not even for yourself. This is for the house. For the space. For the practice. You ladle a scoop of water into the waiting tea bowl, cold, clean, and made with just the right amount of imperfection. The bowl, like you, has been awake longer than it needed to be. It's earned this. The water hits the ceramic with a hollow, soothing splash. You pour gently, then pour again, and finally swirl the bowl in a careful figure-8 pattern, as if waking it from a dream. This is called Chasen-mei, a warm-up, a rehearsal, a private communion between you, the tools, and the water. Historians still argue whether early tea masters took these private rituals as seriously as the public ones. Some claim they were simply about checking temperature and consistency. Others insist they were deeply meditative and internal tuning before the performance of hospitality began. Whatever the reason, this morning practice remains central to most 17th century tea masters' routines. You swirl the bowl again, then empty it out into a ceramic waste basin. A faint trail of steam follows, curling upward like a thought that doesn't quite know where it's going. You return the ladle to its hook, adjusting the angle slightly. Everything must face the right way. The right way doesn't mean symmetrical. It doesn't mean centered. It means meaningful. A slightly off-center chawan, tea bowl, shows humility. An uneven pattern in the glaze allows the guest to notice something unexpected. Even the ladle, when placed with the bamboo grain facing a certain way, becomes a gesture instead of just an object. Mainstream fact: the Japanese tea ceremony, or shinoyu, was not just about making tea. It was an art form, a spiritual exercise, and a philosophical system. It was a performance of simplicity, shaped by Zen Buddhism, wabi-sabi aesthetics, and a serious commitment to doing things slowly. Fringe tidbit: some tea masters went so deep into the concept of imperfection that they'd intentionally chip the rim of their favorite bowls. Not dramatically, just enough to say, yes, even this beauty is flawed. That's what makes it worthy. You don't chip your bowls, but you understand the impulse. You clean the tools in silence, cloth on bowl, cloth on ladle, cloth on whisk. Each movement slow, deliberate, not because you're lazy, but because you're paying attention. You're not trying to finish this. You're trying to be in it. Outside, the wind has changed direction. You hear the rustle of bamboo, the low creak of a pine branch adjusting its posture. A squirrel chitters indignantly from the eaves. Apparently, he too has a schedule. You smile and bow. Not to the squirrel, but in general. To the moment. To the kettle. To the ridiculous beauty of taking 15 minutes to rinse a bowl you're just going to use again later. You sit back and let your hands rest in your lap. Breath enters. Breath leaves. It's enough. No one's knocking. No one's watching. You're not performing. You're just here. With heat. With steam. With the quiet rhythm of a life built on deliberate repetition. This moment, the first boil, the first silence, is often the only true pause you'll get all day. Because even though tea masters are known for stillness, the truth is, it takes a lot of movement to create peace. You feel a sudden itch behind your ear and scratch it without ceremony. There. That's real. That's human. Even in a robe, even in a centuries-old house full of sacred scrolls, your skin still has opinions. You lean forward and adjust the kettle lid once more. Just a few millimeters. The sound it makes changes immediately. A lower pitch. More echo. Like someone exhaling into a drum. That's the signal. The boil is ready. But you're not making tea yet. No, this is still the practice. The stretching before the dance part. You reach for the chasen, the whisk made of one continuous piece of bamboo, split into dozens of tiny tines. It looks delicate, but it's built to last, like every good ritual. You place a small pinch of matcha into the bowl. No scoop yet, just your fingers. Feeling the texture. Letting the powder rest there like moss on stone. Then the water. Then the whisking. Quick, small movements at first, then faster. A tiny storm in the bowl. Bubbles forming, surface gleaming, a fine foam like sea breeze caught in a cup. You don't drink it. You don't need to. This is just the greeting. The rest of the day is waiting. But now, you're ready to meet it. The tea is whisked. The foam has settled. The steam has curled and lifted like a silk ribbon caught on a slow breeze. And now, it's time to dress. Not dress up. There's no audience today, no daimyo dropping by to critique your brushwork or marvel at the rustic elegance of your garden. But this isn't about impressing anyone. In your world, how you dress is how you speak to the day. You stand and move toward the chest where your robes are neatly folded, each set nested within a larger story, season, mood, guest list, type of tea, and yes, even the current phase of the moon. The tea master's wardrobe is a language of understatement, where dusty browns can scream and a well-timed sleeve fold is basically a thesis on transience. You choose a muted indigo kimono underrobe, layered beneath your daily samu, a work robe of deep charcoal. It smells faintly of cedar and old incense. You fold it slowly across your chest, left over right, always left over right, because the other way is for corpses, and that's really not the energy you're aiming for this morning. The obi belt is wide and snug but not restrictive. You tie it off center, with a knot that will rest flat when you kneel. No one sees the knot. But that's not the point. The knot sees you. Mainstream fact, during the Edo period, tea masters were often viewed with the same respect as scholars or artists. Their daily clothing, though simple, was chosen with deliberate attention to symbolism. A single pattern or sleeve length could indicate humility, piety, or seasonal awareness. Fringe tidbit, there's a surviving letter from a Kyoto tea master who refused to wear his usual robe for 3 weeks after a guest commented that it felt too early autumn for this much cloud cover. He apparently responded by staying indoors until the weather and his aesthetic lined up again. You adjust the collar one last time and check your reflection in a polished bronze mirror. It doesn't show much, just enough to confirm that your sleeves are even, your hair is respectfully unexciting, and your expression looks exactly like someone who takes 15 minutes to fold a napkin. Outside, the wind rattles a paper screen. A neighbor's rooster is trying, and failing, to win an argument with a frog. The kettle gives one last sigh, like it's letting go of a dream. You kneel once more, this time on the cushion in the anteroom, where guests are usually greeted. It's empty now, just you and the calligraphy scroll. Today's scroll, changed yesterday in anticipation of this morning, reads something about Duan reeds, fragile, temporary, and always present when you're not trying too hard to notice. You bow to it anyway. A quiet moment of thanks. Not because you believe the scroll has powers, though it doesn't not have powers, but because it marks time. The kind of time that's measured in patience instead of numbers. Your assistant enters quietly, barely a rustle. She bows low and holds out a folded cloth. Inside is today's fukusa, the small silk square you'll use later to purify the tea scoop. It's deep maroon, soft with use, its corners still sharp like a well-read book. You take it carefully, with 2 hands. This is not a prop. This is a signal. The rest of the day is about to begin. Your assistant leaves just as silently, and you remain on the cushion for a while longer, breathing evenly, letting the stillness settle into your joints. This pause, unremarkable as it may seem, is one of the most important parts of the morning. Because next comes motion. And motion requires presence. You rise, carefully, one vertebra at a time, and begin to move through the house with new intention. Robed, focused, no longer in sleep or waiting, but in something that feels like ceremony. Even when there's no one to see it. Your feet touch the floor like each step matters. Because it does. And not in some abstract, poetic sense. No, in a deeply practical way. The edge of your robe can disturb ash. Your sleeve can knock a bowl. A careless pivot can tilt the whole rhythm of the day. So you don't pivot. You glide. You pass through the tea room again, now bathed in soft light. Shadows from the lattice screen stretch long across the tatami. You pause to adjust one mat, barely an inch, and nod when it aligns with the others. It's a good sign. Your sandals wait at the door. You don't take them yet. First, you stop by the small altar tucked into the eastern alcove. A sprig of pine. A tiny ceramic frog. A single stick of incense, still unlit. You strike the flint. The spark jumps. The incense catches, flaring briefly before settling into its long, curling breath. The scent is gentle. Not floral. Not sharp. Just a little earthy. A little smoky. Like the idea of warmth, rather than warmth itself. You bow once more, out of habit, out of gratitude, out of sheer momentum, and finally reach for your sandals. Outside, the garden waits. And you're dressed for it. Not for the weather. Not for fashion. But for what it means to show up. One fold at a time. You step out into the garden, soles tapping gently on the threshold, breath fogging just slightly in the morning air. There's a moment where your foot hovers over the first stone in the path, just the smallest hesitation, as though asking permission. And then you place it down. The flat stone is still cold from the night, slick with dew. Your toes adjust. You move forward. One deliberate step at a time. This isn't a stroll. This is tending. The garden isn't large, but it is layered with meaning. Technically, it's a roji, the dewy path leading to the tea room. But it's also a canvas. A practice. A kind of living poem that changes every day and still insists it hasn't changed at all. You walk past the stone lantern, squat and square, its top moss-dusted and uneven in the way that somehow makes it more dignified. Beyond it, the basin waits, carved from rock, filled from a bamboo pipe, endlessly refilled by a silent trickle. You'll wash your hands there later, like every guest does, before entering the tea room. But first, you must tend. You pick up the wooden rake from its place beside the entry gate. It's not fancy. Just smooth wooden rope, tied by hand, worn in places where fingers have gripped it hundreds of times before. The prongs have uneven teeth, not because they're broken, but because they're perfectly imperfect. You lower the rake into the gravel and begin. Lines. Curves. Swirls. Circles. Not random, not copied. Just felt. Today's pattern mimics flowing water, a stream circling a rock. You pause now and then to adjust your balance, rotate the rake, shift your weight from one heel to the other. The lines appear behind you, soft and crisp all at once. And you don't fix the place where a bird left a track. You work around it. Because that's part of the moment too. Mainstream fact? These gardens were never meant to be lush or showy. Roji were austere by design, a visual palate cleanser before the richness of tea. They encouraged humility, focus, and awareness. Every detail was meant to reset the guest's mindset. Fringe tidbit? Some tea masters were known to rearrange pebbles based on how anxious they felt. A curved line for calm mornings, scattered patterns for days when their joints ached or their apprentice whispered too loudly near the hearth. Scholars still argue whether this was deliberate art or just therapy with rocks. You finish one area and move on to another. The moss needs a bit of coaxing back into its place, just gently pressed, not scraped. You bend low, adjust a clump that's grown rebellious overnight. It resists, then settles. There's a leaf, just one, sitting in the wrong place. You could flick it away, but instead, you pick it up with both hands and carry it to the compost jar like it's a guest who overstayed its welcome but still deserves a polite exit. You step back to admire your work. Of course, it won't last. A breeze will undo half of it before noon. But that's fine. That's the point. You turn toward the plum tree. It's just beginning to show buds. Not flowers yet. Just hints of what's coming. Your teacher used to say the plum tree was the wisest thing in the garden. It bloomed when it was ready, not when people were watching. You pause beneath it, breathe in the sharp, green scent of its bark. You won't touch it. Just let it be. A beetle scuttles across the stone path. You lift the rake so it can pass undisturbed. It's not in your way. You're in its. You finish the path to the tea room last, sweeping the stepping stones with a soft brush. Just enough to clear them, not so much that they look staged. A guest should feel that the garden shaped itself this way, not that someone planned it. Of course, you planned it. But that's the illusion. Hospitality through invisibility. You wipe your hands on a cloth tucked in your sleeve, then return the tools to their place behind the gate. The rake leans against a post. The brush fits into its carved nook. You close the garden door gently, like tucking in a child. And now, back inside. The hearth has quieted slightly. The kettle still murmurs, but softer now, like it, too, has been watching the garden and remembering how to be still. You kneel again. Bow. And take a moment before the next step. Because that's what a tea master does. Moves from one intention to the next. You could rush. No one would know. But you'd feel it in your shoulders. And in the foam of the tea. And in the glance of the guest who doesn't know why they feel slightly out of place. So you don't. You remain there, eyes half lowered, breathing in the scent of clean gravel, moss, and the faintest trace of charcoal smoke still curling up from the hearth. A gust of wind stirs the paper screens. Somewhere in the garden, a single leaf gives up its grip. And falls. Perfectly. Back inside, your sleeves brushed clean, you sit by the wooden cabinet that houses your tools. The air still hums with the faint warmth of the garden, the memory of raking, moss, and tiny steps over wet stones clinging to you like a shadow. Now it's time to get your hands dusty in a different way. Because what's a tea master without tea? Specifically, powdered green tea, matcha, which comes in fine jars sealed like royal secrets and stored with more reverence than your own childhood memories. You reach for a squat ceramic container painted in ochre tones. The lid fits snugly, not tight, not loose. Just enough resistance to make the opening feel like a reveal. Inside, bright green powder, fine as smoke, cool to the touch even though the jar's been resting near the warm hearth. It smells faintly bitter, faintly grassy, like a hillside had a philosophical thought and never told anyone about it. You smile and lean in to inhale it fully. Yes. It's ready. Now comes the work. You retrieve the suribachi, a rough-textured mortar, and the surikoji, a ribbed wooden pestle. These aren't tools for speed. They're for transformation. You scoop a spoonful of matcha into the bowl, avoiding clumps, careful not to spill even a dust mote. Then you begin grinding. Soft, rhythmic circles. The motion almost hypnotic. Wood against ceramic, powder yielding slowly, then evenly, under the gentle coaxing of repetition. It takes longer than you think. Which is fine. Because you've already given up on thinking in minutes or tasks. You're in tea time now. Mainstream fact, in 17th century Japan, tea masters often prepared matcha themselves rather than delegating to apprentices. Grinding the powder by hand before a ceremony was considered a form of mental cleansing, a way to ensure you were present for what was to come. Even high-ranking samurai were expected to wait while this happened. Fringe tidbit? There's a little-known record of a tea master who insisted the grinding process should be accompanied by humming, not a melody, but a vibration. Something about the frequency helping the powder release its tension. Historians still argue whether he meant this literally, or if he just liked humming and needed an excuse. You're not humming today. But you are listening. To the sound of the pestle circling inside the bowl. To the tiny clouds of green rising up and settling back down. to the wind rattling a few leaves across the ingwa outside. Even the occasional, muffled conversation from the kitchen, your assistant, likely scolding the fish delivery boy again for calling her Ojo-san like this as a kabuki play. You pretend not to hear. Grinding complete, you reach for the chashaku, a curved bamboo scoop, slender as a cat's whisker and carved from a single piece of seasoned bamboo. It's delicate, but not dainty. Functional. Exacting. You load just enough powder into a natsume jar for the day's ceremonies. It's not a heaping scoop. No flourishes. Just a measured gesture that ends with a small flick to remove excess. You clean the scoop with your sleeve, not because it's dirty, but because the motion matters. Everything in this world is choreography. Even the smallest sweep of your hand is a step and a silent dance. You set the tea tools out beside the hearth on a woven mat, each with its place, each turned at a precise angle. The scoop, the whisk, the cloth, the bowl, even the waste container, modest and half-hidden, is placed intentionally. And then you pause. Not because you've forgotten anything, but because this pause is necessary. This is the breath between lines. The empty space that gives the shape its meaning. You look toward the scroll again. Still do. Still reads. Still watching. You adjust one edge of the mat by a finger's width. Better. Outside, the air has warmed slightly. A beam of sunlight sneaks through the paper screen and lands right across the matcha bowl. You don't move it. That's not a mistake. That's an invitation. Because in this practice, accident and art are often the same thing. You sit back. Hands resting on your knees. The tools are ready. The room is clean. The kettle is breathing. And the day is just beginning to take shape. Your assistant returns briefly with a tray, soft rice dumplings wrapped in bamboo leaf. They're not for you. Not yet. They're for a guest, if one arrives. But the gesture is the same. Preparedness without expectation. She glances at the tea setup and gives you a barely visible nod. That's high praise. You take the tray, set it to the side, and listen to the kettle again. Still whispering. Not a boil. Not a wait. Just a hum. Like it's enjoying the rhythm of your morning, too. One last check. The water level is just right, the charcoal settled, the ash ring neatly around the hearth like a tiny snowy crater. You adjust the ladle's handle by 3 degrees. Not because you're obsessive, well, maybe a little, but because your body feels when something is misaligned, even if your eyes can't name it. And now, you wait. Again. Not because there's nothing to do, but because doing nothing is sometimes the most important work. You watch a spider cross the corner of the ceiling. No web today. Just exploring. You nod to it. Fellow practitioner. Different tools. The matcha is ground. The bowl is ready. The air smells like bamboo, ash, and thyme. And somewhere in the distance, the first guest begins their walk toward your door. You hear it before you see them, soft steps outside, too careful to be anyone but a guest. Maybe the crunch of a heel on gravel, the whisper of a sleeve brushing bamboo. Even the birds seem to notice, going quiet for just a moment as though giving space to the arrival. You don't rush. Guests should never feel like you are waiting impatiently. Instead, you shift your posture to a kneeling position and give the air your full attention. A leaf drifts past the window. The kettle murmurs. Somewhere, a pine creaks. Then, the knock. Not loud. Just enough. The signal. You rise slowly, robe falling in place without fuss, and walk with quiet steps to the outer gate. It's already ajar. That's intentional. You left it open this morning as a kind of invitation, one the guest has accepted. You step outside and bow. They bow lower. This is the game, of course. Politeness as art. You guide them through the roji, the garden path you raked this morning. And as you do, you silently notice where your pattern has already been altered. A footprint here. A leaf there. But you say nothing. These tiny imperfections are proof that the guest is real. And more importantly, that the moment is unrepeatable. You lead them past the stone lantern. Past the plum tree. You pause at the tsukubai, the wash basin. Your guest kneels, ladles water over their hands, and then rinses their mouth. Not because they're dirty, but because this is a cleansing of intent. A way to say, I'm ready to leave the outside world behind. You bow again. They follow. You guide them toward the Nijiraguchi, the low, square entrance to the tea room. Guests must crouch, bow their heads, and shuffle through. Even warriors had to leave their swords at the gate. Here, everyone is equal. Mainstream fact, the tea room entrance was intentionally built small so that even the most powerful samurai had to humble themselves before entering. Rank and power had no meaning inside the tea room. Only presence did. Fringe tidbit, one warlord famously refused to remove his helmet before entering, wedging himself into the entryway and nearly knocking over the doorframe. Historians still argue whether this was a power play or a genuinely poor understanding of architectural symbolism. Either way, he never got invited back. Your guest enters, knees brushing the mat, shoulders lowered. Once inside, they bow deeply toward the scroll in the tokonoma alcove. Then they admire the seasonal flower arrangement, a single camellia bud this morning, placed in a rough pottery vase. It hasn't opened yet. That's intentional. Anticipation is a kind of beauty. You sit across from them, movements fluid, sleeves trailing lightly on the tatami. There is no rush to begin. Just this, sharing space and silence. You offer a single bow. They return it. Then a faint smile. It's time. You begin the tea making. First, the tools. One by one, you place each item before you on the mat. Not with a flourish. With precision. The natsum jar. The chasen whisk. The chashaku scoop. Each one rotated just so, aligned to the mat seam, catching the light in a particular way. The guest watches. They are not being entertained. They are witnessing. You purify each tool with the fukusa cloth, folded, wiped, unfolded, refold. The cloth becomes an extension of your hand, smoothing time itself. The scoop is passed once, then again. The lid of the jar is cleaned as if it matters more than what's inside. It does. Because in this world, the gesture is the meaning. You reach for the kettle with the hishaka ladle, draw water, and pour it into the waiting tea bowl. The steam rises, swirling gently like an exhale. The sound of it hitting the ceramic is soft, rounded. Your guest lowers their eyes, not out of boredom, but out of reverence. You empty the bowl. Wipe it clean. Set it again. Now, matcha. You scoop precisely 2 servings, no more, no less, and let the powder settle into the bottom like a silent snowfall. The chasen whisk follows. You add the hot water with care. And then, you whisk. Not frantically. Not lazily. Just enough to stir the surface into a gentle froth, tiny bubbles forming like stars in a quiet sky. Your hand barely moves. Just the wrist, flicking softly, rhythmically. The foam becomes consistent. The bowl is warm. You turn it slightly so the most beautiful side faces the guest, and offer it with both hands. They bow before taking it. Not to you. To the moment. Mainstream fact, in Japanese tea ceremonies, the guest turns the bowl before drinking, deliberately rotating the most beautiful side away from their lips. This shows respect for the bowl and for the host who prepared it. Fringe tidbit? Some tea connoisseurs claim they could taste a host's mood just by the quality of the foam. A whisper of bitterness might suggest stress. A too quick pour could hint at ego. Scholars still debate whether this was real sensory expertise or just highbrow gossip with better accessories. Your guest sips slowly, holding the bowl with care. 1, 2, 3 drinks, maybe 4. A quiet sigh of satisfaction. Then the bowl is wiped, turned, and returned with another bow. No one speaks. There's nothing to say. This is the conversation. And so, you begin again. A second bowl. A slower pour. A smaller scoop. Because no two cups are the same. And neither are the moments that hold them. The second bowl is quieter. Not in volume, tea doesn't get louder, but in mood. Your hands move slightly slower now, no longer introducing the ceremony, just continuing it. Your guest's breath has eased into the hush of the room, and even the kettle seems to sigh rather than boil. You whisk again, this time letting the matcha swirl a little longer before lifting the chasen. The foam is delicate now, less performative. Less eager to impress. This bowl is not for awe. It's for comfort. You offer it with the same 2 hands, but your guest doesn't bow quite as deeply this time. That's fine. That's expected. Formality fades, but presence remains. They sip slower, eyes drifting toward the scroll again. The characters hang there like thoughts half remembered from a dream. Do-on reads, it still says. And somehow, that line has aged in the last 20 minutes. It feels like it's sighing now, too. While your guest drinks, you clean the first bowl. This isn't busy work. It's part of the ceremony. The water is poured carefully. The cloth smooths the interior. You check the rim, gently turning the bowl like you're reading a face. This one's made of shinoware, a type of pottery that gained popularity during the late 16th century. Its texture is thick, a little uneven, with iron oxide speckles that resemble burn marks or fallen ash. Historians still argue whether Shino pieces were originally prized for their rugged beauty or simply because they held heat well and didn't crack easily. Either way, their imperfections became their identity. Fringe tidbit? One famous tea master was so enamored with his Shino bowl that he kept it in a personal pouch, wrapped in silk, and addressed it by name. The name? Useless Cloud. Because it always fogged over when hot water hit it. He called it annoying. He called it perfect. Your guest places the second bowl down. This one was different. You could tell. They took fewer sips, held it longer between each one, eyes more distant than before. Maybe they were thinking of plum blossoms. Or taxes. Or a lost cat. You'll never know. That's the magic of tea. It gives people a space to be completely opaque and still understood. You bow again, and your guest returns the gesture. Their shoulders have lowered. Their hands rest more easily on their lap. Even the slight twitch in their left foot has stopped. That twitch started at the garden gate. You noticed it then. You notice now that it's gone. That's not tea. That's time. You clear the tools again, each item returned to its spot. The cloth is folded, not in haste, not for show, just folded. The scoop is placed back in its stand. The whisk is given a rinse and spun gently to keep its tines open. There's a moment where nothing happens. No movement. No steam. No sound. Just a shared breath between two people who will never sit in this exact constellation of time and place again. Then the guest speaks. One word. A quiet thank you that barely breaks the surface of the moment. It's not obligatory. It's not a payment. It's just there. You nod. The ceremony is complete. But the farewell has its own steps. You rise first and step into the adjacent room, returning with a small tray. On it, the rice dumplings from earlier. Wrapped in bamboo leaf, arranged with a small fan of dried persimmon for color. You place it before the guest with a bow, then step back. They don't eat right away. They just look at it. The way someone might admire the cover of a book they're not ready to open yet. Finally, they unwrap one dumpling. The leaf peels back with a faint crackle. The rice is soft, still warm. The guest takes a bite. There's a pause. Then they exhale through their nose. That's the sound of food being better than expected. You sit quietly, letting them finish. No need to fill the silence. The dumplings were made by your assistant, who learned the recipe from her grandmother, who in turn may or may not have invented it herself. Scholars still argue whether the sweet bean paste filling is historically accurate or just delicious enough that no one's willing to complain. Mainstream fact: confectionery and seasonal snacks were often served at the end of a tea ceremony to gently reintroduce the guest to the sensory world. After match's sharp edge, the sweetness helped anchor the experience. Your guest wipes their fingers on the folded leaf, bows again, and speaks a few more words, nothing profound. Just a soft compliment about the garden. Or the scent of the hearth. Or the way the dumpling reminded them of something they can't quite name. You smile. And that's enough. You guide them back toward the small entrance. They bow before crawling through. You follow, steps slow, not rushing the moment's unraveling. Outside, the sun has risen further. The shadows are shorter. The world has resumed. The Roji is slightly disturbed now, but more beautiful for it. You walk with them to the gate. No conversation. Just presence. At the threshold, you both bow once more. This time lower. And then they turn. Their footsteps fade down the path. You remain standing there, watching the space they leave behind. Not to cling. Just to acknowledge. Because parting is also part of the ceremony. The guest is gone, but the room still holds them. You return slowly to the tea room, sliding the shoji screen back with a faint creak that somehow sounds more meaningful now. The air inside hasn't moved, but it feels different. Like the room just exhaled. You kneel by the hearth again. Not to prepare another bowl, just to sit. The tools are still in place, glinting faintly in the soft daylight. The scoop. The whisk. The bowl that held the matcha. You lift each item one by one and begin the clearing ritual, not rushed, not routine, but as an act of respect. Everything used deserves its own quiet goodbye. You pour the remaining water from the kettle into a separate basin, its steam ghosting upward for a brief second before vanishing. The bowl is wiped again, this time more thoroughly. You inspect the rim, the glaze, the base. Not to look for damage, just to acknowledge it. The bowl served. The bowl deserves to be seen. Mainstream fact: in Shinoyu, the Japanese tea ceremony, the host's cleanup is as much part of the ritual as the preparation. It reflects the Zen principle of mindfulness. Every action holds equal value, whether public or unseen. Fringe tidbit? There's an obscure anecdote of a tea master who wept once while cleaning a bowl, not because it broke, but because it reminded him of a former guest who'd since passed away. He reportedly paused the cleanup for an hour to let the bowl feel remembered. Historians still debate whether this was spiritual devotion or exhaustion masquerading as poetic grief. You place the whisk upside down to dry on its holder, brush a stray grain of matcha from the mat, and fold the fukusa slowly, like you're tucking in a child. You close the jar of tea with both hands. It makes a faint pop as the air inside shifts, like the sound of a secret being sealed. Then you rise, brush off your knees, and step out into the garden again. Because after ceremony comes reflection. The roji path shows the trace of the guest's feet, only slightly, a suggestion more than a statement. The light is different now. Midday sun dapples through the pine branches, and a single bee hovers over the basin. You kneel by the stone wash basin and ladle a scoop of water into your palms, not to drink, just to feel it. Cool, weightless, temporary. You splash it across your face and pat dry with your sleeve. In this moment, you are not the tea master. You're just a person who's been awake for a long time. A person with damp sleeves and a slowly quieting heartbeat. You walk the perimeter of the garden, noting small changes. A new petal has fallen onto the stepping stone. The moss you pressed earlier has begun to puff back into shape. One of the bamboo leaves is caught in the water chute, blocking its trickle. You lean down, pluck it out, and toss it gently to the side. The water resumes its rhythm. Small acts. Big meaning. You glance toward the gate where the guest exited. It's closed now. Not locked. Just resting. And with that, you return indoors. Your assistant is waiting just beyond the tea room, kneeling silently. She raises one eyebrow. You nod once. She smiles, bows, and moves to begin her own duties. Likely restocking the charcoal, adjusting scrolls for the afternoon, preparing fresh sweets. You don't have to speak. The rhythm has already been set. And in that rhythm, there's comfort. You settle into a lower room, closer to the kitchen. This space is smaller, used only by staff. The ceiling is lower, the light dimmer, the air thicker with the scent of roasted tea and fermented pickles. A cat, your cat, lazily stretches across a tatami corner. It opens one eye, registers your presence as unthreatening, and goes back to ignoring you. You pour yourself a cup of hojicha, roasted green tea, steeped from loose leaves instead of powdered. The scent is woody, toasted, warm in a way matcha never is. You take a slow sip. No ceremony. No choreography. Just tea as comfort, not performance. Mainstream fact, hojicha became popular in the 17th century for its lower caffeine content and smoother taste. Unlike matcha, it was everyday tea, less formal, more forgiving, and ideal for casual moments or nighttime sips. Fringe tidbit? There's a minor belief among older tea practitioners that drinking hojicha after a formal ceremony washes away the ego. Whether that's poetic metaphor or just an excuse for a second cup, no one really agrees. You cradle the cup between both hands and sit in stillness. The cat purrs, then sneezes. You sneeze too. And for a moment, you're not a vessel of ancient tradition. You're a human in loose robes, hair slightly out of place, probably due for a nap. But before rest, there's one more task. You rise again, softly this time, and return to the tea room to reset it. Not redecorate. Just prepare. Because later today, there may be another guest. Another moment. Another presence to receive. You change the scroll first. Today's has served its purpose. You roll it gently, secure the cords, and place it in the wooden tube that houses the calligraphy. Then you reach for another. This one's quieter, 3 characters only. Translated, it reads, "This too pauses." You hang it slowly, step back, adjust the cords. Then kneel, bow, and remain still for several breaths. It's a different message, but the same idea. The scroll has settled. It hangs there like a breath suspended mid-sigh. This too pauses, and the air around it seems to obey. You remain kneeling for another few seconds, just watching how the paper responds to the faint current of the room. It flutters once, then stops. You bow once more, a closing gesture not for the scroll itself, but for the moment it created. Then, you move on. The cabana, the flower arrangement, needs to change too. Not because the camellia has wilted, it hasn't, but because this scroll calls for a different mood. This too pauses is not about a bud waiting to bloom. It's about what has already bloomed, and what comes after. So, you step outside again, into the side garden, your feet brushing the smooth wood of the englewa. The light has shifted yet again, late afternoon now. Slanted golden rays reach across the moss. The garden doesn't know the time, but it knows the tone. You stoop to select a sprig of wild honeysuckle, still fragrant, but beginning to droop. Beside it, a pale fern that's curled slightly at its tips. You pluck both with care, not stripping the plant, just borrowing a single expression of its moment. Fringe tidbit: some tea masters were known to time their flower selection by how a shadow hit the stem. Not the flower's shape, not its color, just the way it cast light on itself. Historians still argue whether this was a philosophical principle or an excuse to spend an hour alone with some very quiet plants. Back inside, you trim the stems with a knife so sharp it could split a breeze. You arrange the honeysuckle and fern in a humble ceramic vase, round, salt-glazed, faintly cracked along the base like an old laugh line. You tilt the fern a little more to the left. Then less. Then perfect. You set the vase in the tokonoma alcove and sit back on your heels. Yes. That's the feeling. No drama. Just a little bow to the melancholy of time passing. You hear your assistant walking nearby. Her slippers whisper across the hallway outside. She doesn't enter. She knows this space is still breathing from the change. Instead, she leaves a folded cloth beside the doorframe, nufukusa, pressed and clean. You reach for it eventually, pressing the soft fabric between your fingers. A deeper red than your current one. Fewer creases. A little stiffness. It hasn't learned your hand yet. You set it beside the mat for now. It can wait. Everything, eventually, learns how to wait. You check the kettle again. The water level is low, but still hot. You replenish it with fresh water from the ceramic pitcher near the hearth. Steam rises like incense, and the room softens further. Outside, a crow caws once, sharp and sudden. Even crows need to be heard. You glance at the floor mat where the guests sat earlier. There's no imprint, of course. But you still sense the shape of their presence, like warmth that lingers in a seat after someone stands. You decide to walk the perimeter of the tea room. This isn't tradition. It's habit. But habits are their own kind of sacred. You inspect the wooden pillars, fingers brushing lightly over their worn lacquer. These posts were once pine trunks, now smoothed by decades of weather and fingertips. You've polished them with oil from time to time, not to make them shine, but to keep them alive. You check the hinges on the sliding screens. They haven't warped. The paper hasn't torn. But you linger anyway, just in case the wind has done something subtle. Everything is fine. Which, in this world, is remarkable. You return to the tools next. The tea bowl, now cool. The whisk, dry and open like a sea urchin exhaling. You hold it up to the light, just to admire how the shadows pass through its tines. Mainstream fact, the chasen, or bamboo whisk, is hand-carved from a single piece of bamboo and split into dozens of thin tines. The number of tines affects how it whisks the tea. Some schools prefer 80. Others, 100. Each whisk must be broken in with use and eventually replaced. Its decay is part of the art. Fringe belief? Some practitioners kept their broken whisks in special boxes, like tea cemeteries, believing each had absorbed a little piece of each ceremony, like incense that remembers every prayer it's ever burned through. Whether this was superstition or sentimentality, no one agrees. You don't keep a box. But you do keep one broken whisk on your shelf. Not as a trophy. Just as a quiet reminder. You return it to its stand and sweep the hearth's edge again, brushing the charcoal ash into its proper crescent shape. One section has flattened slightly. You fluff it with a twig. Better. Then you rise and stretch. Not dramatically. Just enough to realign your shoulders. The tea room is ready. Again. And though you've been through this ritual 100 times before, maybe more, you feel a small pulse of anticipation every time. Not excitement, exactly. Just readiness. You fold the old fukusa one last time and place it in the cloth satchel under the cabinet. Tomorrow it will be washed, pressed, and rotated back into your collection. Maybe in 2 days it'll be back in your sleeve. Maybe not. You take the new one, tuck it neatly into your obi sash. The transition is complete. And still, the world outside continues like nothing happened. Which, of course, is the point. You hear a rustle in the garden, a breeze, maybe, or a squirrel daring to invade sacred space. You let it be. You kneel one last time in the center of the mat. Hands on thighs. Spine upright, but soft. Eyes lowered, but alert. And you wait for the next moment to arrive. Because a tea master doesn't fill the day. You just clear space for it to unfold. Still kneeling, still listening, you let your breath settle into the quiet rhythm of the room. You don't know when, or if, the next guest will come. But it doesn't matter. That's not your concern. Your concern is the space. The readiness. The vessel that holds what may arrive. And at the moment, that vessel is warm, still, waiting. Then, from down the corridor, a soft knock. Not from the gate this time, from the inner entrance. It's your assistant. Her voice, low and level, the artisan has arrived. You rise without a word. Today, your second guest is not a nobleman or a poet or a wandering priest. He is a ceramic artist, a man who fires his own bowls in a hillside kiln and smells permanently of pine smoke and glazed dust. He's brought a few pieces for you to see, and perhaps, if one feels right, you'll select a new chawan for the autumn season. He waits on the endowa, the porch that connects the rooms to the garden. You find him seated cross-legged, a cloth-wrapped bundle resting on his lap. His fingers are stained a permanent gray from years of ash and clay. He bows, and you bow lower. That's the rule. He unwraps the bundle with care, the cloth parting like a curtain in a tiny theater. Inside, 3 bowls. All different. All quiet. One is thick and stormy, a heavy glaze of iron black with flecks of blue like sparks frozen in a coal bed. One is pale, almost white, with a smoothness like river stone and a lip that curls subtly inward, like it has a secret. The last is crooked, intentionally so, with an uneven glaze of amber and green, and a chip on the base so deliberate it looks like punctuation. You say nothing. He says nothing. This is the evaluation. Mainstream fact: in 17th century Japan, tea masters often collaborated directly with artisans to shape the vessels of the ceremony. A good bowl was not just beautiful, it had to feel right in the hands, carry heat properly, and guide the tea's foam in a specific pattern. Fringe tidbit? There's a persistent legend that one tea master would only approve a bowl if it made exactly 3 different sounds, one when set down, one when filled with tea, and one when lifted. Scholars still argue whether this was a matter of acoustics, or just proof he liked to be difficult. You pick up the pale bowl first. It's light, balanced, graceful. But no, too polite. The kind of bowl that nods at everything but never speaks first. You set it down. The black one is dramatic. The kind of bowl that demands you notice it. Your fingers sink into the thick base. It's warm already, even in this light. You raise it to eye level, admire the streaks, the depth of the glaze. It's striking. But maybe too striking. You set it back. Then, the crooked one. Your fingers settle unevenly into its warped curves. The lip feels like it was made for a particular sip. You turn it slowly, and that chip at the base, yes, that's intentional. It keeps the bowl from spinning in the hands. It grounds it. The surface is faintly pitted. You like that. Texture reminds the drinker that they're not floating. They're here. In this. Now. You look at the artisan. He's not smiling. But his shoulders relax. He knows. You nod. He bows. Deal made. Mainstream fact: wabi-sabi aesthetics, embracing imperfection, incompleteness, and impermanence, was deeply central to the Japanese tea tradition in the 17th century. A misshapen or flawed bowl wasn't defective, it was ideal. It captured the fleeting, asymmetrical nature of beauty. You rise and gesture toward the tea room. The artisan follows you in, not as a guest for ceremony, but as a guest of form. You place the chosen bowl in the center of the tatami mat, letting the light strike its side. The afternoon sun glows through the rice paper window, catching the edge of the glaze just right. The artisan kneels beside you. Together, you simply look at it. No tea. No water. No words. Just observation. Because before a tool becomes part of the ceremony, it must be seen. Your assistant enters quietly, sets down a tray of barley tea for the two of you. Not matcha, this isn't ceremony. This is collaboration. You thank her with a nod. She exits with the same soft grace as always. You sip the barley tea slowly. Its flavor is nutty, faintly roasted, cooler than matcha but more filling. The artisan sips too. You ask him one question. Was this bowl made at night? He pauses. Then nods. You knew it. There's something about the glaze, the way it's not even, the way it pulls slightly off-center, like it was reacting to the kiln's midnight breath. You talk a little about the firing. About the pine ash. About how the air grew humid this week, making the glaze bubble unpredictably. You both agree that unpredictability is often a gift. Fringe tidbit: some ceramicists of the Edo period believed that bowls made during storms carried a charged spirit, as though thunder left a fingerprint in the glaze. There are even poems written to teacups that cracked open under moonlight and thundercloud. You'll remember that when you serve tea from this bowl. Eventually, the artisan wraps the other two bowls in cloth, securing them with a knot so neat it could close a story. He bows again, this time a little deeper. And then he's gone. You remain. The crooked bowl still sits on the mat. You don't clean it. You don't move it. You just watch the light slide across its surface, the way a wave finds a rock and whispers, "Thank you. You'll use it tomorrow." Or maybe not. Sometimes a bowl needs to rest in the space before it performs. The room, as always, is patient. And so are you. Evening drapes itself across the garden like a silk shawl, light thinning out, shadows stretching long over the stepping stones. You rise and move slowly, each step careful not to disrupt the settling hush of the tea room. It's not nighttime yet, but the edges of day are starting to fray, and that liminal time, the space between things, is your favorite. You return to the small kitchen area, the mezuzah, tucked just behind a bamboo screen. Here, the practical lives in harmony with the poetic. Copper kettles, wooden ladles, small cloths folded like origami. You set about preparing for tomorrow, even though it hasn't yet arrived. That's the thing with this life, tomorrow starts tonight. You rinse out the basin. You empty the wastewater. You polish the kettle with soft strokes that smell faintly of ash and river clay. Your hands move without needing to think. You've done this 1,000 times, maybe more. Mainstream fact, the mezuzah was not just a prep area, it was a hidden engine of the tea ceremony. Tea masters trained for years in how to work in its narrow space, developing muscle memory that was part choreography, part devotion. Fringe tidbit? Some tea masters reportedly slept with their cleaning cloths folded under their pillows, believing it helped absorb tomorrow's calm. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic practice or just a polite way to keep roommates from stealing their best fukusa. Outside, a nightbird sings once, twice, then falls silent. You take a moment to sit beside the hearth, though it's gone cold now. No flames. No steam. Just the faint smell of carbon and time. You place your hand just above it, remembering warmth the way someone remembers laughter, no longer loud, but still echoing. You close your eyes. And for just a moment, you allow your mind to wander. Not to the future. To the past. To the first time you ever stepped into a tea room. You were young. Nervous. Wearing a borrowed kimono and slightly too long sleeves. The mat felt strange beneath your knees. The silence was louder than you'd expected. The tea was bitter. And you were hooked. Because beneath the silence was something alive. A current. A presence. An invitation. You open your eyes again. And realize, now, you are the invitation. There's a knock, this time, at the garden gate. It's late for a visitor, and unexpected. But not alarming. The knock is polite. 3 soft taps. You step out onto the engawa, the wooden corridor that hugs the house. Cool air brushes your cheek. The garden glimmers faintly under the early moonlight. The stone path glows just enough to lead someone safely forward. You unlatch the gate. Standing there is an elderly monk. You've seen him before, maybe once or twice. He doesn't speak much. Always walks slowly, always carries a bundle wrapped in linen. Tonight is no different. He bows, low and unhurried. You return the bow, then gesture him in. He follows you down the garden path, his sandals brushing against gravel. When he reaches the tsukubai, he pauses, washes his hands with the kind of deliberateness you'd expect from someone who's walked a very long road. He enters the tea room without a word. You light the hearth again. Not because there's time for a full ceremony, but because warmth is its own kind of hospitality. The kettle is already filled. The tools, cleaned. The crooked bowl, still resting on the mat, seems to nod at you like, now would be a good time. You prepare one single serving. This time, no flourishes. Just tea, in its simplest form. You whisk gently. No foam. Just enough to blend the powder. You offer the bowl. The monk takes it with both hands. He sips once. Then lowers the bowl. And speaks. You've chosen a difficult scroll. You glance at the hanging phrase again, this too pauses. You smile faintly. He sets the bowl down, then draws something from his linen bundle, a single piece of calligraphy rolled carefully around a small wooden rod. He holds it out to you. You receive it like a question. He bows again. Then leaves. No further words. Mainstream fact: Zen monks were sometimes invited to bring seasonal scrolls or calligraphy to be displayed in tea rooms, each scroll chosen not for decoration, but for meditative weight. A phrase wasn't just seen. It was contemplated. Fringe tidbit? One scroll, infamous in tea circles, read only, none of this matters. It caused such existential unrest among guests that the tea master who commissioned it was politely asked to return to hosting poetry nights instead. You unroll the monk's scroll slowly. 3 characters. Simple strokes. Soft ink. Translated, they say, even the wind rests. You look from it to the one hanging now. This too pauses. Then back again. Same meaning. Different rhythm. You don't switch the scroll yet. But you will. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after. When the wind rests, so will you. You step outside once more before bed. The night is fully here now. The garden is silvered. A breeze picks up through the reeds and rustles the bamboo fence like 1,000 folded fans being gently opened. The moon has risen, round, calm, unspectacular in the most beautiful way. You breathe in. Then out. And return to the room. Not to clean. Not to reset. Just to sit. Because some nights don't need to end with doing. They need to end with being. The moonlight slides quietly across the tatami, brushing the surface like a silk sleeve. You sit alone in the tea room now, long after the monk's visit, with the faintest curl of steam still drifting from the kettle. The air smells of spent charcoal, crushed camellia, and whatever thoughts haven't yet settled. You don't speak. The walls don't answer. But the silence has a shape. It folds around you like another robe, warmer than it has any right to be. You shift slightly, reaching into the wooden box tucked neatly beside the wall. Inside, your scroll collection, each one wound carefully around its own rod, bound in silk cords, labeled with soft calligraphy. A lifetime of moods, proverbs, and small provocations waiting for their turn. You run your fingers along the edges. They know this ritual better than your eyes do. One scroll reads, "First frost is also a gift." Another, if you blink, the moment passes. One simply says, "Don't." You pause at that one. Chuckle quietly. You remember the guest who reacted to it with actual panic, convinced it was a warning. "Don't what?" they asked. "Don't speak? Don't sit? Don't drink?" You never answered. They drank faster than anyone you've ever served. You leave that scroll where it is. Tonight isn't a don't kind of night. You reach instead for one you haven't unrolled in years. You don't even remember what it says, only that the fabric is a little frayed at the corner and smells faintly of cedar and plum oil. You untie the cords, gently unfurl the paper. 3 characters. Soft strokes. Uneven, like the brush was trembling. It reads, "Some things drift." You don't hang it up. Not yet. You just let it rest on your lap, the edges gently curling back toward the center like it's exhaling with you. Mainstream fact, the use of calligraphy in the tea ceremony was more than decorative, it was emotional cueing. Hosts used certain phrases to shape the guest's mental state. A single line could shift the tone of an entire gathering. Sometimes it was a seasonal reference. Sometimes a philosophical nudge. Sometimes a dare. Fringe tidbit? There's a tale of a tea master who hung a scroll upside down on purpose to provoke discomfort in an arrogant guest. The guest said nothing, out of pride, but drank his tea with shaking hands. Historians still argue whether this was poetic justice or petty sabotage. You return the scroll to its cloth wrapping, place it back in the box. The monk's scroll still sits near the tokonoma, even the wind rests. It belongs there. At least for a little longer. You rise, stretch your arms above your head, and let out a sigh that feels like it's been waiting all day. You're not tired, not exactly. But your bones are heavier now. You can feel where the kneeling mat left its pattern on your legs. You'll carry that imprint for the next few hours, like a signature from the tatami itself. You step out onto the ingawa again. The garden is breathless. The moon is higher now, and the gravel path sparkles faintly in its glow. There's dew forming on the stepping stones. One drop hangs suspended from a pine needle, trembling but never quite falling. You wonder how long it can balance there before gravity finally whispers, "It's time." You move quietly, barefoot now. The stones are cold. Not shocking. Just clarifying. You walk to the small bench near the gate. It's low and plain, made of old cedar that's smooth with time and weather. You sit, arms draped across your knees, back slightly hunched. And for a while, you do nothing. Just listen. To the insects. To the rustle of bamboo. To the occasional creak of the house behind you, settling into the night like a cat curling tighter in sleep. You think of the guests who passed through this space. The ones who came quietly, drank slowly, and left with lighter hearts. The ones who arrived hurried, distracted, who eventually exhaled into stillness. The ones who never spoke a word. And the one who spoke too much. You think of the bowl you chose today, the crooked one. Still sitting on the tatami, probably dreaming of warm water and green foam. That bowl will be part of someone's memory soon. It might even change their life a little. Or not. Tea doesn't need to matter. It just needs to be. You rise from the bench and return indoors. The paper screen squeaks faintly as you close it. Inside, the hearth is dim but not cold. You add one last piece of charcoal. Not for heat. Just for company. The flame stirs. You kneel again. You breathe again. The world hasn't asked anything of you in the last hour. And that, somehow, feels like a gift. Mainstream fact, tea masters often meditated in the tea room long after guests had left. The room was more than a performance space, it was also their sanctuary. A place to recover from formality, to reflect, to simply exist without expectation. Fringe tidbit? One master reportedly claimed his tea room was smaller than a coffin but deeper than the ocean. His students still argue whether that was wisdom or just a very dramatic way of saying, "I like being alone." You smile at the thought. Then, gently, you extinguish the flame. The room darkens. Not suddenly. Like a bow. Like a closing line of a poem whispered by shadows. Morning returns without announcement, just a shift in tone. The shadows soften, the birds speak in question marks, and the paper screens start glowing with a faint light, like they've remembered the sun exists. You wake already kneeling. Well, not quite. You fell asleep curled against the tatami, the smell of charcoal and tea lingering in your sleeves. Your neck is a bit stiff, your obi sash slightly crooked, but otherwise, you've survived another night of being utterly unnecessary to the modern world. You rise with the kind of grace that only comes from repetition, brush off your robe, and step out onto the Inglewood once again. Morning air. Fresh and unapologetically honest. A little damp. A little sharp. The moss is already awake. The dew on the stepping stones hasn't dried yet. You dip a ladle into the basin and splash cold water on your face. You don't gasp, it's not that dramatic, but you do blink a few times harder than usual. The day has arrived. And like it or not, so have you. Today, there will be no guests. This isn't uncommon. Tea masters, especially those not directly serving a lord or temple, often had entire days where their role was less host and more quiet caretaker. On those days, the work shifted inward. So, after a breakfast of barley rice and pickled plum, and a second helping of roasted sweet potato that your assistant pretends not to notice, you return to the tea room not to prepare it for someone else, but to commune with it yourself. Because sometimes the best ceremony is one you never perform. You light the hearth anyway. Why? Because heat is a kind of presence. You fill the kettle. You whisk a small bowl of matcha. This time, you don't worry about foam. You don't posture your hands just so. You don't even bow before sipping. You just drink. And it's bitter. Deeply so. You added a bit too much powder. But somehow, it's exactly what you wanted. Mainstream fact, solo tea rituals were common among practitioners, especially on days of rest or reflection. These were known as mushizukushi, or non-hosted moments, where the master could experiment, refine, or simply exist with the tools in a private rhythm. Fringe tidbit? A diary from the early 1600s mentions a tea master who once served tea to a garden statue during a month-long vow of silence. Historians still argue whether this was a meditation on humility or the very first recorded tea-based breakdown. You rinse the bowl, wipe the surface, and place it gently to dry. The crooked one. Yes, again. You still like the way it listens. You spend the next hour examining your tools, not using them, just regarding them. The scoop, carved from a rare variety of bamboo, has darkened over the years. You rub it lightly with oil from your sleeve. It hums beneath your fingers. The whisk, still springy. You flick one of the tines. It bounces back, almost defiant. The cloths, creased perfectly, still carrying the faint scent of last night's hearth. You place each item in its box. Then take it out again. Not because you're indecisive. Because today is a study day. Your assistant brings in a small tray, not tea this time, but ink, paper, and a slim stack of books. Writings from previous tea masters, both helpful and hilariously vague. One passage simply reads, "When the guest sits, you have already Saturday." What does that even mean? You know, deep down. You just don't feel like unpacking it before noon. You open to a bookmarked page, a detailed diagram of seasonal themes for the tea scrolls. Today, technically, is between two traditional festivals. Not quite autumn, not quite summer. A border day. So you retrieve the scroll left by the monk, even the wind rests, and decide to hang it again, this time not as a closing gesture but as an opening frame. You light a stick of incense, not one of your usual ones, but an older blend made from sandalwood, clove, and something that always reminds you of driftwood. You place it in the alcove, and the room shifts again, like it's turning over in sleep. You sit and just observe. The smoke curls. The scroll sways. The kettle begins to whisper again, low, content, like it's telling secrets to the flame. Mainstream fact: the relationship between incense and tea in Japanese culture goes back centuries. Incense wasn't just about scent, it was a temporal marker. Different blends were used at different times of day, season, and occasion, helping to shape the guest's emotional landscape. Fringe tidbit: there's an old saying among incense connoisseurs, if your tea is bad, burn better incense. It was both a joke and an escape plan. Later, you visit the storehouse, a small, cool space behind the tea room where tools and scrolls not in use are kept. It smells like cedar planks, rice paper, and dust you don't dare disturb. You check the inventory: 2 extra kettles, 5 unused bowls, 1 tattered bamboo screen that you keep for no reason except sentimentality. Maybe it reminds you of your first guest. Maybe it just squeaks the right way. You find a box of old sweets, candy chrysanthemum petals, slightly past their prime. You eat one anyway. Still good. Still a little too crunchy. But who's judging? You return outside to sweep the path. Not because it's dirty, but because you want to trace the curve of the stones with your broom. The garden answers in tiny sounds: the scratch of gravel, the shush of bamboo leaves, the steady drop of water from the stone fountain into its basin. Some days, this is enough. Some days, this is everything. As you pass by the camellia bush, you pluck a single faded bloom and carry it inside. You don't arrange it. You don't put it in water. You just set it near the hearth. A little reminder that even fading things deserve front row seats. There's something different about the light this afternoon. Softer, rounder, like it forgot to be urgent. The shadows slip slowly across the mat, moving at a pace that makes even snails look impulsive. You sit once more in the tea room, legs folded, hands relaxed in your lap, listening to the world inhale. This is the quiet part of the day, the part where nothing is expected, and everything just is. You don't plan a ceremony. You don't check your tools. You don't rearrange scrolls or rehearse guest seating patterns. You just exist. And so does the room. The hearth still smells faintly of pine ash, warmed and lived in. The kettle is quiet now, having finished its gentle whisper hours ago. You don't relight it. You let it rest. You let everything rest. Mainstream fact: Japanese tea culture, especially during the Edo period, embraced moments of intentional stillness, periods where no ceremonies were conducted, but the space remained alive. These interludes were often where clarity and creativity emerged. Fringe tidbit: a 17th century tea master once closed his tea room for an entire season, not out of illness or travel, but to allow the walls time to listen. Historians still argue whether this was metaphoric genius or the world's slowest burnout. You rise slowly, joints sighing a little as you stretch. Then you do something rare: you remove the scroll entirely. No replacement. Just the bare alcove. A single space. Nothing hanging. Not even a flower. You stare at it for a while, then give the faintest nod. Yes. Today, that's the correct answer. You take a walk, one you've taken hundreds of times, down the garden path, across the stepping stones, through the narrow cedar gate, and toward the outer yard. The air smells like wood smoke from a neighbor's stove, a distant reminder that life continues even beyond the edge of moss and ritual. You pass the bamboo grove and reach the outer well. Draw water just to feel the rope in your hand, the gentle tug of weight against resistance. You splash a little on your wrists. Cool. Refreshing. You sit by the well for a while, staring at the sky. Some clouds. A few birds. No grand omens. Which is exactly what you wanted. Mainstream fact, for tea masters, days without guests were often reserved for observing nature. They weren't off days but part of the practice itself, watching how moss darkens after rain, or how light strikes a stone differently in August than it does in March. Fringe tidbit? Some masters claimed they could tell the temperature just by how fast incense smoke rose. Others claimed they could tell a guest's mood from the shape of their footprints on wet stone. Historians still argue whether this is intuition or delusion dressed as poetry. You return to the tea room in time for sunset. It bleeds orange across the wooden beams. The shadows stretch like lazy cats across the floor. You open one paper screen to let the breeze in, not strong enough to stir the scroll, but enough to make the incense curl differently. The crooked tea bowl sits exactly where you left it. It hasn't moved. But somehow, it feels like it's been waiting. You pick it up. Hold it in your palms. It's not warm. But it's not cold either. Just balanced. Like it knows what it is. And knows you do, too. You place it back down gently on a square of folded silk. You extinguish the last coal in the hearth. There's no hiss. Just a quiet surrender. Then, you lower the bamboo blinds. One by one. Until the room is dim. Until the world inside becomes smaller than the world outside. Until you feel the soft grip of sleep pressing gently at your shoulders. And then, you breathe out. Long. Even. Present. Because no guests are coming. No rituals remain. And no one, not even you, needs to do anything else. The tea has been drunk. The tools have been cleaned. The room has spoken in the only language it knows, quiet repetition. Stillness. Imperfection. Time. You fold your robes for the evening. Roll up the mat. Blow out the lantern. And with a final glance over your shoulder at the space you've tended like a second heartbeat, you leave it for the night. Not locked. Not forgotten. Just paused. Now, as the last light fades and the night wraps itself around the old cedar walls like a well-worn robe, everything slows. Your breath. Your thoughts. Even the air between the floorboards seems to hush. The tea room rests, empty but not lonely. Outside, the garden listens. The stones remember your footsteps. The camellia bush nods gently in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once and then grows silent, as if reminding the world it's time to sleep. You feel your weight settle into the earth, your thoughts drifting like that single petal you placed beside the hearth. There's nothing left to fix. Nothing left to polish or clean or arrange. The kettle is cold, the scroll is rolled, and the crooked tea bowl waits patiently for tomorrow. Let your shoulders soften. Let the breath in your chest stretch a little longer, a little deeper. You've spent the day practicing a kind of presence few ever get to know. No fanfare. No applause. Just ritual and rhythm and a stillness that tastes like moss and rain and memory. You are no longer performing the tea ceremony. You are the ceremony. So close your eyes. Let the quiet hold you. And when you dream, may it be in the shape of steam rising slowly from a perfect cup, vanishing gently into the dark.